Goodness comes and evil goes. Kimunga Ukombozi, Kimunga Ukombozi, Kimunga Ukombozi, divine liberty, divine liberation, divine freedom, and all that will bring for African people wherever we happen to be on the face of this earth. Karibu and welcome. My name is Kwende, and today we're going to be discussing the very important subject of Alive with Afrikan Name. Alive with Afrikan Name. Now, highly recommended is a viewing of the previous video entitled The Living African Person Self, Multiple Parts, because that will give you some background into what we're going to be discussing today. And the reason why that's important is not only that it highlights the several parts that make up the African soul, all 9 of them, but the name, the African name, is actually one of those parts. And it is referred to as the Ren. So the Ren then is described as being the essential attribute for the preservation of the African being. In the absence of the Ren, the African self ceases to exist. This is what comes out of the African wisdom tradition. In the absence of an African name, the African ceases to exist. Now that's very profound and deep. It really is, because it highlights just how important our names are, how important the African name is. And when we are given a name and we journey through life with that name is one of the most consistent words, if not the most consistent word, that we hear throughout the duration of a lifetime. And it doesn't stop there, because names are called when the breath leaves the physical body. So we remember a person through their name. We recall that person through the name. And names in an African name is profound and deeply meaningful. It carries meaningful substance. So you may have a name meaning great queen, or a name meaning great king, a name meaning courageous, brave, intelligent, genius, all kinds of descriptors that come with the name. And so when we hear the name, we have a name to describe who and what we are, or who and what our spirit reflects. It's very powerful. So the child is given an African name at the early stages of life's journey. Sometimes it's because of the characteristic that child has already expressed. Or maybe it's a name that reflects future projection, grand elevation that's to come in that child's journey. Whatever be the case, the African name is a powerful asset to African life, a vital asset to African life. Of course, in recent centuries, Africans have been subject to all kinds of interruption and disruption by others that mean the African ill. And during the course of the last several generations and counting, the African name has been stripped from the African. The foreign enslaver has removed African names on purpose, brutally so, because it doesn't serve his interest to have African souls empowered with the strength, the natural strength that an African name gives the African. That doesn't bode well for him at all. Africans who know themselves, who know what substance that they carry, are not good to enslave. So it's important to strip the name from the African and render the African in a state of unknowingness of self, void of at least one of the essential attributes for the preservation of the being. Having stripped the African of natural names, what is then imposed are ID tags, labels, peddled as names, which really stamp the African, or that was the intention, to stamp the African with the idea or the notion that the African is property, his property, to disuse and abuse at will, or worse. So the stripping of the name has been then replaced with labels, actually the surnames of the foreign invader and colonizer or enslaver, and then that is what has been perpetuated from generation to generation among African souls. So it's surely time to reclaim natural power and strength, the natural attribute for the preservation of the self. Surely it's time for that. Obviously, African people are not anyone's property. African people are not the property of others at all, and therefore have the natural divine right to name themselves and reap the benefits of empowerment that naturally brings. And Africans ought not then continue to perpetuate the imposition of labels peddled as authentic names, doing the job of the enslaver for him. So the African must surely break that cycle, must surely reclaim the grand inheritance of having one's own name from one's own linguistic tongue. Again, the African is not property, not chattel, not to be branded and mislabeled as such. A basic step that we can take to reclaim ourselves and move along that path of full flourishing is to restore our names. The African, in reclaiming his or her natural and powerful African name, elevates the self with the strength of that name. Every day being called great king or great queen, or one who's highly intelligent, or one who is always victorious, one who walks with the strength of the Creator Supreme. Now imagine that is reflected in the name that a child gets, and throughout the duration of that child's lifespan, that is reinforced every single time that child's name is called. That's an empowered African self. And it surely cannot stop at just the naming of new life coming forward. Because as adults, Africans have a responsibility. It is surely right to reclaim what is rightfully yours. That beautiful, that magnificent, that rhythmically sounding name. So there is naming for the newborn that is beginning that journey of life in the physical sense. And for those that have already journeyed with the unknowingness of not having an African name yet, we can simply reclaim our names. Be proud of who and what we are. Elevate ourselves accordingly and see the selves shine and blossom in grand, illustrious, and fully flourishing bloom. So with that food for thought and food for traction, until such time again, Kimunga Ukumbozi, Kimunga Ukumbozi, Kimunga Ukumbozi, divine liberty, divine liberation, divine freedom, and all that that will bring for African people wherever we happen to be on the face of this earth.